Wade and Daffodils, Part 1, Murray. It started with Wade. The teapot, parturient, billowing, green, resembled a gravy boat with a spout. Hunter's Green, some called it, but this was definitely more the snot-green sea of Joyce. Thick, heavy, but in areas opaque. The lid had on it a small cluster of grapes the size of a raspberry, sitting Thumbelina-like on a single vine leaf. They were painted off-white. Vine grapes encircled the middle of its body in that same off-white shade, fumbling phantasmagoric. The top was shell-like, not rounded like most other teapots, but sort of flattened, patelliform, like a grape-lidded limpet. And then descending all the way down were scales, small at the top and larger towards the base, fishy scales as though armouring the pot, preparing it for a slippery escape. When it broke, shards scattered across the floor and the scales simply flaked. The raspberry remained intact, looked juicier even, like a frosted jelly sweet. I wanted to grab it, to save it, but in her panic, Mama stepped back and crushed it. No juice came out. She got pregnant at some point in the spring of 1962. It was cold, preemptive of the oncoming big freeze that following winter, but March was sunnier than usual. We had been sitting in the garden, lounging, pretending it was summer. Reginald and Randolph were playing piggy in the middle with Elise, who was by then 12, and whose athleticism had entirely stunted the changes of puberty from blossoming onto her body. The boys, more men now, although still almost perfectly identical at 20, had come home for their birthday. They had brought a crate of Fuller's London Porter. It was thick and brown and heavy. It reminded me of a filthy canal. Me and Mama were giddy from drinking champagne in the sun. We were listening to the greatest hits of 1959. It was the first record on the stack. And Paul Anka's Put Your Head on My Shoulder was playing. She wrapped her arms around Reggie, sang a little bit, and then asked him to pour her a glass. Reggie stopped swaying when she said this. She never drank beer. He raised her eyebrows at her in a way that made her blush. Dr. Gregory said it's good for a woman in my condition, that's all, she said sheepishly. The boys looked across to me and then back at her. Elise carried on as though nothing was off. I'm pregnant, she said. 38 years old and 9 weeks along, apparently. She gave us the same quivering smile she performed each time Papa left for Africa, one that said, it's fine, but really, it isn't. All women have one of those. Having finally caught on, Elise trotted over, eyes wide, then squinted at her belly and said, but where did it come from? Mama snapped something along the lines of, well, it wasn't magic, then snatched my Marlboros and took off to her bedroom. The boys were quick to chuckle and tell Elise that her hormones must already be playing up. Elise was none the wiser. 2 weeks on, and everything had settled. We all became rather excited at the prospect of a tiny tot crawling around, and believed, or at least hoped very passionately, that she would be having a boy. We named him Michael and decided that he would be our little pet. Whenever she got flustered, would say little Mick was making her mad again. I was at university at the time and came home only at the weekends. Mama was often alone with Elise, who had been expelled from boarding school after breaking her religion teacher's ruler when he tried to hit her with it. Mama had initially told me that she was looking forward to this time with Elise, but their sudden forced proximity created an even greater distance between them. Elise was not interested in becoming a woman. She simply wanted to carry on being herself, wearing shorts and not crossing her legs and playing with the boys. She didn't want lipstick or bows in her hair or to know anything about kissing. She had cringed and thrown a dishcloth at me when I tried to explain Mama's pregnancy to her. Papa had been stationed at the oil company's offices in Nairobi. He'd get sent out for 6 months at a time, although we never knew quite what he did there. In his absence, she had reunited with Jacqueline, an old school friend. They met by chance at the tennis club when Jack moved back to Devon. Jacqueline was around so often that Elise took to calling her auntie. I think Elise was closer to her than Papa. She certainly looked up to her more. Jack was around when the incident with the Wade happened. It was a particularly warm Sunday in April, 19 degrees. She was teaching Elise how to make custard. The kitchen was a mess. Double cream smeared across the baby blue countertop. Icing sugar handprints had been smacked and smudged onto the matching overhead cupboards. Cornflour drifted in a haze around their faces and settled on their nose tips. Mama had been picking strawberries in the garden, her sun hat flopping as she hummed the Shadow's Wonderful Land over and over and over, and then, hearing Elise's roar of success, she came in, face aglow, hands sticky from the sanguine drip of the berries' juices, to make tea. She cleared us out of the kitchen, as she always did. Brewing was a process she found sacred. Hastily, we snatched what was in sight. I slid the napery off the dining room table. Jack handed Elise a bundle of records, and with sleeves rolled up to reveal rather brawny arms, hoisted our champion turntable outside. Mama beamed at us as we marched through the kitchen, and then shooed us out the door. We hadn't even been outside for a full 5 minutes, bickering over whether to play Eartha Kitt or Buddy Holly, when we were stopped by a clamouring crash and shatter. It sounded as though a band of percussionists had dropped all their cymbals simultaneously. And then a thud, and then silence. We ran back inside, and she was shaking. She didn't make a sound, not a scream, not a wince, not a whimper. Her head and hands were cut. Blood had begun to gather on the Wade shards, causing the crushed lid by her foot to look more berry-like than it did before. The complete 12-piece tea set had fallen on her from the glass cabinet over the workbench, followed by the tray they were kept on, which must have been stored clumsily. Despite the shock and some minor physical injuries, she came away without a concussion. However, that night she felt a warm trickling down her leg and found blood on her knickers. After her miscarriage, she spent the first 2 weeks in bed, saying that she was in too much pain to move. When she finally got up, it was a frosty Friday night, and Elise was already asleep. Mama hounded the alcohol cabinet for whiskey and cigarettes, and then charged into the garden with a bag of Papa's clothes. I followed her out with a torch. I would be angry too if someone got me pregnant and then fucked off to another continent and was absent for the miscarriage on top of that. So I helped her. The garden was big. The back doors of the kitchen and living room led to a patio where we had some sun chairs and a dining table. And beyond that there was a long stretch of green with a hedge at the end, behind which hid a pond and some trees. The area by the pond was tiled, making it ideal, so we moved all the smaller plants aside and emptied the bag into a heap. Mama had already necked a quarter of the bottle by then. She lit a cigarette, took another swig, and poured the rest onto his clothes, then flicked the cigarette onto them, and the whole thing went up. There was a fleeting beauty to it, the flames gradually gaining momentum, the crackling sounds of his suits deteriorating, the warmth oozing out of that ruin. The fumes quickly became too thick to stand next to, so we threw buckets of pond water onto the fire to choke it. I traced my torchlight along the burnt patch to see what was left, and noticed some goldfish got thrown into the fire too. They were grilled now, perfectly barbecued. We laughed heartily for a moment, and then she went sullen, rubbed her belly, and said, "It's better this way." The next morning, we all had breakfast together. She got up before the rest of us, made fresh orange juice, and prepared a spread of boiled eggs, toast, thick-cut ham, porridge, marmalade, scones, and cream. Elise, who was asleep when we burnt the clothes, asked us why we smelled funny while making a mess of one of the eggs. Its golden orange yolk splattered across the table, dribbled down her fingers, warm and sticky. I told her we burned some garden waste, but I couldn't stop thinking about the charred goldfish over the ashes of Papa's clothes, and how really they felt like the ashes of Papa himself. Elise didn't think twice about what I said. She simply sucked the yolk off her fingers and started singing the chorus of Return to Sender. I still don't know why she liked Elvis so much. While we were doing the dishes, Mama pulled me aside and kept reiterating that something was askew in her body. She said she could feel it rattling through her, croaking against her throat and behind her ears. And yet she wasn't sure what it was. She told me that she visited the doctor after her miscarriage. He gave her some tablets and said they would help her sleep and make the croaking go away. Part 2. Elise. My school wasn't very far from home, so the day I got expelled, I walked back. Mama had spoken to the headmaster on the phone and told him that she couldn't pick me up because Papa had just left for Africa and forgotten something in his driver's car. She was waiting for Mr. Hammock to drive back with whatever it was. I never liked him. He was old and had a mustache and always seemed to be wearing a belt that was far too big so that the end of the strap flopped to the side of his trousers like a dead snake hanging out of his pocket. We crossed each other while I was walking up the drive to my house. He looked smug. His Bentley was glistening. He had one hand on the steering wheel and he was wiping his mouth with the other. When he saw me, he slowed a little bit, peered at me, and then sped off. I ran up to the house and Mama was in the front room, sitting on the coffee table. Her hair was a mess and her stockings were torn and there was blood on her leg. She told me she tripped on the corner of the table, but she was tall and her thigh was definitely higher than that. I liked Auntie Jack because she let me call her Jack, and even though she spelt it Jacq, it still sounded like a man's name, and that didn't bother her. I also liked that she didn't wear skirts and had short hair. I wanted to look just like her, so I put a bowl on my head and got some scissors and tried to chop everything off. I couldn't get the back though, so I still have it in a little ponytail. Wretched thing hair is. Mama says girls always have to brush their hair, but why does it hurt so much to do it? I always thought Mama would pull my whole head off when she'd brush it for me. Does it always have to hurt to be a girl? Mama was at the hairdresser's herself when I did my hair. She goes every Saturday because she says Papa needs her to look nice when she meets with his friends. But Papa was hardly ever here to see her. When she came home, I was still on the blue stool in the bathroom. My hair had fallen across the sink. I didn't hear her come in, but she screamed so loudly that I dropped the scissors onto my right foot and one of my toes began to bleed. I hoped she wouldn't see that. I didn't want her to scream any more. Later on, we sat down for tea, and she said it looked as though a plant had died on my head. And then she began to laugh, and eventually cry. I don't know why she did that. Papa didn't even cry when he came home. He didn't cry at the funeral. He didn't cry at the morgue when he looked at her body, stiff and green. When he returned from Nairobi, he made a phone call from the living room and started shouting at someone, saying it was their job to make sure of something or other. I hadn't heard the rest of the conversation. Murray caught me hiding behind the green door and pulled me away. She yanked my ear so hard that it still pops sometime. Mama had a big nose. It drooped off her face, and sometimes, in candlelight, her shadows looked like a crow. This made me feel safe. The thing I remember most from the morgue is how much cotton wool they had stuffed into her nose. What were they trying to hold in? 4 months after I stopped school, we were preparing tea, and the Wade set fell on Mama. She was poorly after that happened and stayed in bed for a long time. Auntie Jack taught me how to cycle. She took Murray's bike out of the shed and fixed it. It was pink, and Murray had tied ribbons to the handlebars so they tickled your arms while you moved. I didn't like the way they felt, so Auntie Jack helped me take them off. She made me cycle up and down the garden the first day, and after that we cycled along the seafront. She laughed at me and said that I got onto my bicycle like a boy, that I didn't need to throw my leg over the seat, but that I could just slip it through the middle. I liked doing it my way. I thought it helped me push off and go faster. On the way back, we cut daffodils for Mama. Auntie Jack was wearing a big white shirt with light blue pinstripes, and it danced behind her as she cycled. It had a deep chest pocket in it, in which she put the daffodils. It reminded me of when Papa would fix a flower to his suit when he and Mama went out. She said that was called a boutonnière. When we got home, the sky had turned the colour of a bruised peach, and the last rays of light were being quickly devoured by the horizon. Auntie Jack told me to take the daffodils to Mama. They were so bright it looked like they had been dipped in the sun, but they smelled like something gone off, like old cheese. I put them in a white jug that had Bell's Scotch whisky painted onto it in red, and decided to leave it on her dressing table so that she wouldn't have to smell them. The next morning, Mama got up very early and made us breakfast. She used to do it every day when Papa and the boys were home, but she stopped when it was just her and me. She said it's because I don't eat as much as them. Murray was home for the weekend and was using the bathroom I normally use, so I decided to go to Mama's. I had never noticed before that the mirror in hers was a cupboard, as it didn't have handles. A piece of paper stopped it from closing properly, so I tugged it and the whole thing swung open. There was nothing extraordinary inside, just an iodine bottle, a packet of cotton wool, some aspirin, a pair of tweezers, and a flat small box made of clear plastic, labelled Nardil 15mg. The paper was attached to the box and read, Marguerite Mortimer, 1 caplet every night before bed, signed Dr. A.S. Gregory. It definitely belonged to Mama, but I didn't know what it did. Before she did it, she sent me away to summer school. She said I needed to learn how to fend for myself. After we stopped talking about Little Mick, she started to act different. She would send me out with Auntie Jack a lot, and sometimes she'd be asleep by the time we got home. She never wanted to have dinner, not even that time we came back with a big bag of mussels that we spent hours scouring the beach for. She used to love eating them before. Now she always said her ears and throat were bothering her, that it happened every night. Must be part of growing old, she told me. I wasn't sure about that. She was only 39. Other times she'd say that she has to look after her figure for when Papa comes back. He used to be gone for a couple of months, and then he would spend the rest of the year at home with us. But this year he only came back after what happened to Mama. Mama was meant to collect me when summer school finished, but most of the children had left and I was still waiting, so they called Murray to pick me up instead. On the drive home, Murray said Mama was probably just at the hairdresser's and running late. It was a warm day, and we rolled our windows down. Murray quite resembled Mama with her long brunette hair, eyes like chocolate buttons, and the same nose. She was wearing a frock with flowers on it. The sleeves kept puffing up with the wind, looking like they would burst and send daisies flying into the brown rubble ahead. I wished that would happen, but I knew it was impossible. She switched on the radio, and Please Please Me was playing, so we turned the volume up and sang as loud as we could. The road was empty. When we got home, the house smelled like cabbage and boiled eggs. Mama hated cabbage, so we thought it was strange that she would have cooked it. It was very silent too. Just before the sunset, the house would usually glow like a swollen orange, and the last dregs of light would pool in from the kitchen through the hall. The door was closed, though, and had been locked from the inside, but the smell was very strong and made me cough. I started to feel dizzy. Murray grabbed my hand and pulled me away. We telephoned Auntie Jack from the front room and asked if she knew where Mamma was. And Murray told her about the smell and that we couldn't open the kitchen door. When she hung up, she walked me to the car and said we would go for a drive until Auntie Jack came over. The next time I saw Mamma, she looked like a mannequin. She had been dressed in a white chiffon shirt and a deep blue pencil skirt with a matching bolero. The suit made me think of the song Blue Velvet, and I wished I could wake her up and sing it with her. Her skin was the colour of the Wade tea set. I expected her to be wrapped in grapevines and scales under her blouse. Her eyes were closed, and there was cotton wool in her ears too. She had on a pink lipstick, but I never saw her wear it before, so I don't think it was hers. Her hair looked nice, though. Papa came in to see her with me. He only looked at her for a minute and then turned around. He told me I had to get changed because I was going back to boarding school now. I didn't get to see Auntie Jack before leaving, but I remembered the time I saw Mamma kissing her the same as she did Papa. Mamma told me it's how grown-ups greet each other sometimes, and that I don't need to think about it.